Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Oh, it's an enthusiastic crowd. I love that. Thank you to those of you who are joining us here in Centennial Hall, and thank you to those who are tuning in online for this exciting conversation. I'm Allison Calhoun-Brown. I'm the Senior Vice President for Student Success here at Georgia State, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you and introducing you to this event. Our program today is Engage and Expand the Dream. It will examine the shifting landscape in higher education and how institutions can transform and how this transformation is both necessary and possible through data-driven, proactive interventions at scale. But before we start with today's discussion, we are honored to have the president of Georgia State University, Dr. M. Brian Blake, who will come up and welcome you to this event and to Georgia State. Dr. Blake.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I can't tell you how excited I am to be able to join you today and to get a chance to have this conversation, and also get a chance to meet a lot of folks that are here that are a part of the NISS and beyond. So, for Won't Lose This Dream, this was like, I think the first time I read the book would have been about 2 or 3 weeks before I interviewed for this job. So, and then later, Todd Shutley and the foundation board, he actually sent me a copy, so I had 2 copies. But the interesting thing is that the book just chronicles a lot of, when you think about this university and what has occurred over the last 10, 20 years, it really is one of the most transformative things that have occurred in higher education. It's not just Georgia State, but it's the broader landscape. I'll tell you what was funny though. When I arrived, I had met Dr. Renick before in, I think we met in Arizona briefly for a Gates Foundation award. But when I came and I read the book, I was walking around and I was like, Dr. Allison Calhoun-Brown, you're the star of the book. And then I saw Mark and I was like, just admit them. So, so all of the things in the book, it was great coming on scene. Everyone was so the rock stars, the celebrities were here. So, and then one of the earliest events on campus as president, I did get a chance to meet Andrew Gumbel, who's here. Where is he? Is he backstage? Maybe he's somewhere. But I'll just say, really good to see him again. So I'm looking forward to his comments here today. So like I said, the book chronicles kind of one of the major success stories in higher education in the past 3 decades. And it's, when you think about the history of higher ed and what it kind of means to kind of who we are now as an institution and what we can provide through our new institute, it not only does that work, but it also tells the story of our students, which I think is just also one of the most inspiring things about what we do and then kind of what it means to other institutions. So I've already mentioned Dr. Tim Renick, but he's like a national treasure. And he has no quit in him at all. So, I see him, this interesting senior on campus now, I see him as much away from campus in different places than I see him on campus. But you just have such an amazing way to connect with audience no matter what their backgrounds is. So I'm just so lucky. I feel so lucky and privileged to have you as a colleague, and thank you for all you're doing. And for those who don't know, I think everyone here does. He previously served as our Senior Vice President in Student Success, but now is our founding Executive Director for our National Institute of Student Success. And it's just great to kind of have you still on the team, and we're going to keep you on the team forever. You're never leaving. So thank you for doing this. You invited me here for today. So today, for the rest of you, you're in for a fantastic treat. You're going to learn more about Georgia State's approach to student success and the NISS, and today's speakers include both Tim, Allison, Andrew, and also one of our fantastic students, Serinna Mccree, who I just met. And they're going to introduce her, but I'm just going to tell you what I found out about her just now. She's a senior criminal justice major. I thought immediately she may want to be a lawyer, and she told me no, she didn't want to be a lawyer. That's a good thing. Nothing against all the lawyers in here. But she said something that was really interesting. She said she wants to be a detective. So I immediately got a little bit concerned because she probably profiled me right away, but but we are looking forward to your comments as well today. So just to give you some background, one of the things that I think is chronicled in this book and about Georgia State, and largely due to the work that we do to graduate students, has been, we've been recognized by U.S. News and World Reports as like the #1 public institution for undergrad teaching, which in combination goes with being top 5 in innovation, which those are two things you hardly ever see together. A focus in innovation and research while also being able to be empathetic to students and provide real personal, individualized, support to students, and graduating students from all different types of background due to our accessibility. It's a unique. We're a unicorn in this way. So it's been great to kind of see how all this, how we combine data analytics with empathetic student support. We have a core faculty that are just innovative, and staff that represents, I think, one of the premier communities of scholars in the country. So it is great to kind of bring a culmination of that, document it in press, in a book. Now we're getting to the second edition where it will go into paperback, so I'm going to have to get my 3rd copy of the book. We'll do that tonight. But I think when you think about that being a way to inspire institutions and communities to really think more broadly about where we get our workforce, where we educate the next generation, I think it's great to kind of have that book, and then also have the work we're doing with the NISS to expand to other institutions. And I hear that in 3 years, over 100 institutions are already implementing these approaches. So I want to thank all of those that work in the NISS. I want to thank everyone that's here that's going to get a fantastic treat today. We are all going to say in one resounding voice, we won't lose this dream. Trying to work that in. Because this is going to be, we're just beginning. This is going to really be the next story of higher education. So let me thank you all for being here. Welcome to GSU, and I know we'll enjoy today's celebration. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Blake. As Dr. Blake says, it really is a pleasure to have all of you here today for this event. I'm back to set the context and to introduce our speakers. And so I want to kind of reflect on the work that we've done, because in so many ways, it was very unlikely that Georgia State would become the location of a transformation in student success. Georgia State became a national model for student success by challenging the conventional wisdom that poor graduation rates and equity gaps are the inevitable result of having lots of low-income students, of having lots of first-generation students, of having lots of underrepresented minority students. Today, nearly 60% of GSU's undergrads are low income. 80% identify as non-white. 35% are the first in their family to go to college. And over the last 15 years, these numbers have risen significantly. Georgia State is the only Research One institution in the country that is predominantly Black. We are a research institution that has the access focus through our associate's degree granting college, Perimeter College. But our results continue to belie demographics. For the 5th consecutive year, Georgia State University has awarded more than 7,000 undergraduate degrees, a 70% increase since 2010, and across-the-board increases in success rates for all demographic groups. Positive student outcomes and the elimination of achievement gaps based on race, ethnicity, and income have characterized the work on student success at Georgia State for more than a decade. On average, since 2015, there have been no achievement gaps based on these characteristics, with the graduation rates of African American, Hispanic, and low-income students often surpassing the rate of the student body overall. But what is especially exciting this afternoon is that you will hear that this kind of success is not unique to Georgia State University. The National Institute of Student Success was established at Georgia State to disseminate the data-driven, proactive approach because the challenges of producing better educational outcomes have been issued to all of higher education. Whether it's a legislature interested in a return on investment, a neighbor interested in social justice, a parent wanting to know if it is reasonable to go into debt to finance college education, the Chamber of Commerce looking to college to meet workforce needs, a community expecting the transformational value of educational experiences, or a student simply wanting to know the likelihood that college can help them achieve their dreams. Everyone is expecting education to produce beneficial outcomes. Founded only 3 years ago, with the goal of delivering on the promise of education, the NISS has already partnered with institutions enrolling more than 1 million students. Results have been encouraging. Retention rates for the first cohort of schools that work with the NISS were 4 times higher than the increase in retention rates nationally. Several university systems, including all 26 of the public institutions in Georgia, have signed up to work with the NISS and to identify ways to improve student success using this approach. It is my great pleasure to provide a brief introduction for each of our speakers today. Andrew Gumbel, the author of the book, is an award-winning journalist, like I said, author of Won't Lose This Dream, How an Upstart Urban University Rewrote the Rules of a Broken System. I'm gonna need water. Sometimes you can be smooth, and sometimes you need water. So I'm sorry about that. Andrew Gumbel is an award-winning journalist and author of Won't Lose This Dream, How an Upstart Urban University Rewrote the Rules of a Broken System. His narrative traces the transformative story of Georgia State University and its innovative approaches to closing achievement gaps for all students. The new edition, and you need the new edition, because it emphasizes Georgia State's role as a national innovative leader in student success and delves into the creation of the NISS and their work with more than 100 institutions nationwide. Joining him is GSU's own Dr. Tim Renick, founding and executive director of the National Institute of Student Success and the architect of many of the student success interventions developed at Georgia State. During the time that Tim led the Student Success Division, the university transformed its approach to student support, removing institutional barriers and introducing signature initiatives, including the use of microgrants, predictive analytics, proactive advising, chat bots in admissions, enrollments, and in the classroom, the expansion of peer mentoring for academic support, financial wellness, and improvements in preparation and college to career guidance. Thanks to Tim's leadership and a campus-wide commitment to student success, during his tenure, hours earned at completion by students was reduced by almost a full semester, saving this year's graduating class $21 million compared to the class that graduated a little more than a decade ago. Tim was named one of the most innovative people in higher education by the Washington Monthly and one of the world's 50 greatest leaders by Fortune magazine, and he is also a recipient of the McGraw Prize. It's kind of like the Nobel Prize for higher education, and it's awarded to individuals whose innovation, inspiration, and impact are making a difference in the lives of students. Alongside them, we are honored to have Serinna Mccree. As Dr. Blake said, she's a current Georgia State senior majoring in criminal justice and minoring in digital criminology. Serinna will share firsthand experiences and insights into really how what we've piloted Georgia State has worked and supported her during her journey. Our conversation will conclude with an engaging audience discussion moderated by Dr. Jessica Williams, the NISS Senior Director of Client Service Delivery, who leads the charge in guiding and supporting partner institutions to implement innovative strategies and scalable solutions that enhance student success. One of the things that I like the most about Won't Lose This Dream is the way that it gives voice to the experience of our students. Some of the stories are extremely sad, heartbreaking experiences with poverty, homelessness, hunger, but they are a testimony to the tenacity of our students. Institutions should be equally tenacious in the pursuit of student success. I am proud to be a part of a university that recognizes if we admit students, we should create a context for them to succeed, and is courageous enough to admit at times we ourselves are the obstacles to that success. The student success story at Georgia State celebrates what we have been willing to do in pursuit of our own mission to ensure that students from all backgrounds graduate at high rates and receive the degrees that they came to Georgia State to get. This work has helped us become who we aspire to be and what our students expected and deserved. I hope that you leave today inspired and encouraged. Now let's begin the conversation.
Thank you so much, Allison. Thank you, President Blake. Thank you for all of you for being here. I just want to say, I am not a higher education specialist. I came to this project as an outside pair of eyes and ears, and it was a tremendously inspiring journey. As I read about higher education in the newspapers and online now, it's a very daunting time. There's a lot of, frankly, quite grim stories about students grappling with the daunting challenge of meeting the cost of higher education. There's stories about campus protests and discord between faculty and administrators and students. There's fear of AI, where it's taking us. This is all pretty gloomy stuff. And when I come to Georgia State, it's always a reminder that there's also a much more optimistic outlook on those issues and many others, and to be in a place where people believe that positive change is possible. So I'm delighted to be back here. Thank you for welcoming me so warmly. Serinna, do you want to come out? We're going to start by talking to somebody who I think is a very optimistic person too. I just met Serinna for the first time online, of course, because we live in different cities, and got to know her a little bit. I'm very impressed, largely because whenever I've talked to students in the past, and Allison, you alluded to this, a lot of the stories are very tough. I was really blown away by student after student who had endured tremendous challenges at home with finances, with getting to where they wanted to get, and displayed this extraordinary tenacity to overcome periods of sleeping in their car, periods of not having enough to eat, and so on. But Serinna, what really impresses me about you is, you came in with a tremendous challenge, which is you started here in the middle of the pandemic.
Right.
Which had kind of thrown everything into uncertainty and chaos. And on top of that, you were the first person in your family to attend a four-year institution. So it was all brand new. Maybe you can, talk a little bit about what that experience was like. What were the things that you braced yourself for and were expecting, and what were the things that kind of blew you away and you weren't quite sure how you were going to handle?
Well, I started at Georgia State in 2021 where COVID was still a big thing. Everybody was still wearing masks and everything. Everybody was afraid of getting COVID. When I got down here, I didn't know where anything was at. I didn't know like where to go, what to do. I remember then I had 2 roommates back then, and we would just kind of walk around the campus to try to familiarize ourselves with like the classroom buildings and like things like that, so we could know where to go and everything like that. But yeah, it was kind of difficult because I didn't know where everything was at, but I kind of adjusted to it, and this is my 4th year here, so I'm like, I know everything now I think I need to know.
Right. So, one thing that impressed me when I was here before the pandemic, there was a very well-organized orientation process. There were ways in which students could be supported if they needed to get their administrative ducks in a row before they started with inoculations or getting their financial forms in order. You had none of that, right? Because it wasn't available because of the circumstances.
Yeah, it was no in-person orientation. It was online. So I was kind of sad because I didn't get to tour the campus like other students did and things like that. So I was just like, it's kind of a, not the best, but I made my way around campus eventually.
Right. And so when was the first time, or what were the times in your time here when you became aware that there were support services that you could rely on? What were the most obvious ones to you? Presumably you got an advisor like everybody else gets here, but was there a time when you began to understand that despite those, unfortunate circumstances, there was a support system here and you began to take advantage of it?
I would say in freshman year, during that time, I had an academic coach and an advisor, which I didn't know I would have like 2 people out there that are like assigned to me and can help me and everything like that. I remember my advisor and my academic coach reaching out to me, telling me that I can reach out to them if I needed any assistance and everything like that. And I took advantage of that because I'm like an overthinker and I get worried about my grades and everything like that. So I wanted to be sure that I would have enough credits so I could move on like to my sophomore year. So I remember meeting with my academic advisor and we just discussed out a plan and everything like that. And she told me I was on the right track. And she told me like if I ever needed to reach out to her, where I could reach out to her and everything like that.
Right. And unlike a lot of students here, from what you told me, you were very sure from the beginning what it was you wanted to major in. Do you want to tell everybody what it was that inspired your major?
Well, I'm obsessed with Law and Order Special Victims. Only the Special Victims Unit one, though. Only that one. That's the best one. Like, I started watching that show when I was about maybe 12 with my grandma. We would just always watch it, and we would just like say, "Oh, this is the criminal. This is that. Like, what happened?" And I just always told myself, "I'm gonna be like Olivia Benson. Like, I love her."
So how does the reality of studying that subject match up to how you imagined it from watching TV?
Well, and I'm taking a class right now. It's called Serial Killers, which is a very interesting class. So we previously discussed like how the media like portrays killers and everything like that. And it's not always as it seems. A lot of serial killers, people think they're psychopaths, which is not all the time true. Sometimes they're sociopaths. So it's definitely different from what we see in television. I would say once I'm out there, I guess I will see for myself like how it is dealing with cases and everything. So yeah.
So tell us a little bit more, in terms of how your advisor, your academic advisor, intervene. And, it seems to me you're somebody who's very on top of things, but what kind of prompts do you receive? Do you get reminders that deadlines are coming up or, questions about how you did in a particular test? What's been your sort of experience over the last few years of interacting with that system?
I would say my Georgia State email, like one thing Georgia State will do is send you emails like about everything. So I am updated through my email. When my advisor will send out the class plans, like for each semester, we will get an email and it will just like tell us to go and log into Navigate and click on our planner and we can view the schedule of classes that the advisor has given us.
Right. Okay, and one thing I've learned from interviewing a lot of students is that you know the system that is handed to you because you're here as a student. You're not necessarily aware of how it evolved, where it came from, how difficult things were before the system came along. One thing you told me that I'd love you to talk about a little bit is that you have an older sister who has had a higher education experience that's involved other institutions. I think she's now here as well,
Yes.
right? But despite being 3 years ahead of you, she had a more difficult path. I'd love you to tell me a little bit about that and how you've understood maybe the differences between different higher education institutions.
So in 2018, I believe she graduated from high school and she started out at Georgia Piedmont. I wasn't really too familiar with the school. She started out with majoring in film there. She was registered for a class that she didn't know that she was in, so it kind of made her GPA go down. So that's when she decided to attend the Perimeter campus, and then she did her 2 years there, and then she transitioned down here to the Atlanta campus, and she finally was able to find like what she's interested in as far as her major. It was health information, and then she changed it to women gender studies, and now I think she's flourishing now, and this is like her thing.
Right.
So, yeah.
And just to, all of you in this room may know it, but maybe some of the people on the live stream don't, that one of the things that Georgia State's excelled at is the ability to understand when someone may be on the wrong track and to change them as quickly as possible onto the right track. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like it took a little while for your sister to get that support. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so tell me, what it's like in terms of juggling the money question, because this is always an issue. As Tim has pointed out many times, the sort of the decisive factor that determines whether students do well or badly is it's not about academic prowess. It's usually about how much money they have, how much money they have to spend before they graduate, and if they can do so before they run out of that money. So tell me what your experience of that has been like. What scholarships you've had, how you've managed your money, and if there've been some moments when it seemed difficult or even impossible.
Well, I was worried graduating high school and everything, because I'm like, oh, I don't have enough money. My parents don't have the money to send me to a 4-year university where I have to get supplies, books, and pay for housing, meal plan, things like that. But then I learned about the Hope Scholarship when I was applying to the school. And I was like, oh, okay, my GPA is good, so I think I can maintain this. So that's when I applied for Hope, and I've had Hope since I've started here, and I haven't had any issues with my GPA like going down drastically and everything like that. So I'm not as worried as I was about it before, because I know I can maintain my GPA hopefully, and I'm almost done. So,
And you've worked jobs outside of your studies as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So I worked at a virtual reality place. It's called Sandbox. I will never do that again, but and I worked at this restaurant called Gusto. Not at the location down here. It was the location, I think, on Ponce. Also, will never do that again, but it was hard because I have to do my classwork and everything like that, and I would just get home late every time. So I'm just like, that's not for me.
And was there any issue in terms of scheduling the expected work hours you had and scheduling your classes specifically, or was there a way to keep them separate?
As far as working outside?
Just scheduling clashes between your classes and when you were expected to go to your job.
It wasn't time clashes. It was just that I would get home really late and I have to be up in the morning for class, things like that.
It's a lack of sleep.
Yeah, right. And
right.
I need my sleep, so.
Right. As everybody does. So, and now you work at the advisement center.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, because obviously you get a window into other students' problems as well. So, in this period now after the pandemic, tell me a little bit about the typical issues you see coming up that you interact with, and if they're different now from before the pandemic, as far as you know.
I would say one of the main issues is that students register for classes too late. By the time they register for classes, the classes that they need or that they want are gone by the time they do it. A lot of times students have holds. The university advisement hold is a hold that gets placed on your account when your GPA drops below a 2.0. So a lot of students have that hold, and by the time they call the advisement center to like get the hold removed, it's almost too late because, you know, when registration opens and you have your time ticket, you should do it as soon as possible because the classes are going to go fast.
Right. And then what typically does the advisement center do with students that have got that hold and whose GPA has fallen? You know, how do they kind of help them get back?
So there is this thing called an academic improvement plan. It's a plan to map out like your classes for each semester. So there's the warning is the first step of it. If you don't bring your GPA up by then you're gonna go on probation, I believe. And then if you don't bring it up then you're gonna be excluded. So the advisement center, they sit down with the students and then they just discuss like which classes would be best to bring the student's GPA up and everything like that. Right.
Okay, interesting. So if you could advise somebody, you know, coming into their freshman year, you know, what it is that Georgia State can offer. You know, there's a lot of teenagers out there right now wondering, do I even want to go to college? It's so expensive. What would you say to them to encourage them to get a degree, and how to convince them that it's actually going to be possible?
I would say, first off, Georgia State has a lot of majors like you probably haven't even heard of maybe. So I think that everybody should just give it a try. You can come in undecided. You don't have to have a set major. You can always change your major. I've seen people that change their major like 3 times, from computer science to art to music, like whatever you think that's going to interest you, you'll eventually find it. And I think that everybody should give it a chance. College is not for everybody, but it doesn't hurt to try. So.
And just, you know, from somebody of your age looking out at the world, you know, how important do you think it is to have a degree? What kind of a difference in your life or in the lives of your friends do you think it can make to get to the end, get your degree, and then face the job market with that qualification?
I think it's very important, especially if you want to get a leadership position. You're gonna want to have like that, you know, higher education degree, or, you know, even a master's degree maybe. A lot of people say that you don't need a degree to, you know, get a job, which may be true, but for me, I'm gonna get my degree and I'm gonna get my master's hopefully too. And, you know, cause it's always learning that can be done. It just never stops sometimes.
Right. And so it's the difference between being a beat cop and being a detective.
You said, what's the difference?
No, I'm saying it makes the difference between being a beat cop and wanting to be a detective.
Right.
Well, Detective Mccree, as we should call you, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Tim, come on up. I'll reintroduce you because Allison already did such a beautiful job. But, so I wanted to just start off this segment by saying, you know, I am born in Britain, as you can probably hear from the way I talk, and we're very attuned there, and we talk a lot about class issues. We also talk about race issues, which you know, hit a little differently in Britain than they do here. And hang on one second, let me just. And you know, one of the things that was very striking when I got to know you, Tim, is that you have your own trajectory that, you know, touches on those issues. And you know, people know quite a lot about Tim's work in student success at Georgia State and now with the NISS. They're familiar, those of you in this room are familiar with the results. I don't know that everybody is completely familiar with Tim's own story, and I will tell you that it's not something he loves to do, so I'm putting him a little bit on the spotlight here.
I love to talk about myself.
So I'm going to do it just for a minute.
Chance. Joe, get me started.
Because I do think it does cast a very interesting light on the work that you've done and that everybody here has done since. So, you know, looking superficially at how you grew up on the North Shore of Long Island, you know, near the millionaires' mansions that, you know, written about in The Great Gatsby. You went to Dartmouth, the Ivy League. You know, people could easily get the wrong impression of who you are. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it's clear from talking to you, and I know from asking you the story, that, you know, this was not a place that you necessarily felt you fit in one way or another. So I'd love to just ask you, what were the ways in which you became aware of not being part of the educational elite despite being a brilliant student, and how that sort of started to form the way you saw the world?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that for much of my early life, I felt that I was an outsider, and I think by most objective measures I was. So I spent my high school years in one of the wealthiest zip codes in the US, North Shore of Long Island, about 40 minutes outside of New York City, area called Great Neck or Kings Point. I went to a high school that Time Magazine regularly ranked as one of the top 10 public high schools in the country. The reason I was there was my dad was career military, and there's a military operation on the North Shore of Long Island, the Merchant Marine Academy. My dad was career Navy and Merchant Marine, and so in my high school years, I was in Great Neck and in Kings Point. I definitely did not feel at home there. I was very clearly not in the same economic class as my classmates. This was extreme wealth. These were, in many cases, big mansions on Long Island Sound overlooking the skyline of New York. I had classmates who were sons and daughters of major television executives and celebrities and athletes and so forth, that they would finish their 10th grade, and I would be walking home from high school, and they would have a sports car in the parking lot with a ribbon on it and so forth. So I lucked into being at a really highly ranked high school, which when I did well academically allowed me then to go on to a very prestigious college. And at Great Neck High School, the high school I went to, literally 50-60% of the class went to Ivy League schools. And so it was just kind of the assumption that that's what you were going to do. And then I got to Dartmouth, and it was a whole different world. I was not prepared for that at all. I literally, when I arrived at Dartmouth, didn't know what Exeter was. All these kids came from Exeter. Exeter is a private elite school in New Hampshire. I had no idea what they were talking about. I was work study from the first semester. I was assigned to work in the kitchen, and especially the dish cleaning part of the kitchen, so that there would be conveyor belts that would bring the trays from the eaten food back to the room where I was stationed. And my job was in part to take a rubber spatula and scrape the food off the plates before you then load it into the dish machine. And most of my friends, I was the only one in my circle who was work study. And so my friends knew that I was back there, and so they would put little notes on their napkins and so forth, put them on the conveyor belt. Hey, Tim, so forth. And it was an amazing opportunity. I actually graduated Dartmouth almost debt-free, but I was working in my junior and senior years 3 jobs. I was working, eventually I came to manage the dining hall at Dartmouth. I was working as an English instructor in first-year composition classes, and I was tutoring in the writing center all at the same time. So, I went to Princeton as a graduate student, much of the same. It was just like, this is not me. It's a great opportunity, but I'm not part of this group. And as you quote me in Won't Lose This Dream, it's not just that at places like Princeton and Dartmouth, the students didn't need me. They didn't need Dartmouth or Princeton, right? I mean, these are students who are going to succeed no matter what, because most of them just had this support system all around them. And so when I came to Georgia State as a junior faculty member right out of my Ph.D. program, it was the first time I felt that this was, a home. This was someplace I felt comfortable. I understood these students. I knew what they were going through. I knew their levels of confusion about, what college is and not understanding how these systems work and so forth. And I think from an early period, it made me very attuned to how delicate the balance was between the students who succeed and the students who don't succeed at Georgia State. I got to know our students really well because I was starting a new department of religious studies. Some students would take classes 4 or 5 times from me over the course of their careers. And I saw some of these students went off to the highest heights you can imagine. These students would succeed. We sent students to graduate programs at Oxford and Cambridge and Chicago and Harvard and Yale. and we had equally talented students who didn't survive 2 semesters. And the difference was not talent and ability. The difference was not getting a form in time, not registering for the right class, not knowing the right person, and so forth. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but in many ways that was great prep work for what eventually became my second career in student success.
Right. Well, one of the things that struck me when I first met you, first met Allison, you're people who were very successful in the classroom. And I think you both had an instinctive sense that, whatever else was going on with students and causing them to fail or succeed, it wasn't about their innate ability. It wasn't about what you could do for them as a teacher. And I'm just curious, having gone through Dartmouth and Princeton, was there a moment in the classroom when you started out where you came to that realization that, wait a second, no matter how disadvantaged the background is, the student is here, admitted, in my classroom, I can work with him or her, and the problem, whatever it is, lies elsewhere? Because I don't know that that's something that even teachers in the university environment necessarily appreciate.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I'll say that it may have been out of desperation. I don't know if people know this, but when I arrived at Georgia State as a junior faculty member, most Georgia State classes still met 5 days a week. And my load my first semester was 5 classes. 5 classes, 5 days a week, 25 preparations every week. It was, and people used to say this, it was glorified high school, and in some cases not so glorified after all. And so maybe out of desperation, what I ended up doing is assigning students basically the same assignments I had in the courses at Dartmouth and Princeton. I didn't think that there was any need to turn to a textbook. We used primary text for all of my classes in religious studies. I never once used a textbook in any of my courses. I put together readers of these materials, many of the same materials I was reading at Dartmouth and Princeton. And I gave assignments comparable to what the assignments I got at Dartmouth and Princeton. And what I saw from the very beginning is that students rose up to the level of the expectations. And there were students who were every bit as talented as the students at Dartmouth and Princeton. There was more variability, quite frankly, between the strongest and the weakest students at Georgia State. But I found even those students benefited by being challenged and given these primary texts and these assignments that were not dumbing down anything for them. And I think it was only because of that these students were able then to go on and successfully get into Cambridge and Harvard and so forth, because they were used to doing the same sort of work that would be expected at the most elite institutions.
Now, it's worth saying that, for those of you who don't know, that, Tim was a celebrated teacher, won many awards. One of the things that intrigues me when you made the transition to administration, the calculation is that you could do on a much larger scale for students what you did for a smaller number in the classroom. But, it must have felt at the time like a bit of a leap of faith, because I assume the classroom was a place you felt comfortable, you loved interacting with the students, and suddenly you were going to be doing things that would not have the same, high contact with students, and you would have to sort of hope that in this complicated mechanism, which is a university administration, you could make a positive difference. What was that like, making that transition? And, we all know now it was very successful, but I imagine when you started out, you didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it still is a loss. I mean, I will say that the one biggest drawback about moving full-time to administration is losing the day-to-day really close contact with students. And, all told, I taught over 3,000 students. Because our students are wonderful at Georgia State about staying in the metro area, barely a week goes by that I don't encounter our students, typically in the most awkward and embarrassing circumstances, but that's okay. Because they're all out there doing wonderful things, and many of them stay in the metro area. But I do miss that. I will say this for anybody, especially any students in the room. One of the wonderful things about a career in academia is that you can change careers without anybody really noticing, at least the outsiders. My parents for years thought, okay, he's still at Georgia State, but I was a junior faculty member. Then I was a department chair. Then I directed the honors program. Then I became a vice provost. Then I became senior provost or senior vice president for student success. Day to day, my job had changed 100%. There was almost no overlap between what I was doing with one job and the next, But my parents still said, oh yeah, he's still at Georgia State. So that's really nice because it allows you this opportunity to do all kinds of different things. And what I didn't appreciate, and I've kind of grown into this as my career in student success has evolved, is while I was leaving teaching students behind, that I wasn't leaving the teaching behind. And my job now is very much still, how do you find a persuasive way to, with evidence, make a case? It may be not students now, as my NISS colleagues know. Oftentimes it's the presidents and cabinets of other institutions. But that whole ability to try to take complex ideas and make them compelling and graspable and understandable to different audiences is what I'm doing day to day still to this point.
And that's often very challenging because when you tell people what you've been doing up to now doesn't work, we need to change what you're doing, a lot of people find that threatening. I don't know if you can tell a story or two, naming no names, where you had that issue and you had to overcome it.
Yeah, so you heard in the intro that the NISS is now working with about 100 campuses. We've got another 60 waiting to onboard once we have the bandwidth to serve them. And overall, the experiences have been very great because the clients know what they're getting into, right? There's no surprise because Georgia State does have the reputation of this is going to be looking at the way in which you as an institution are contributing to the attrition rates of your students. There's going to be hard work to be done and so forth. But I will say a couple things. One is we have to be very careful to present the data, and we lead our engagement with every campus for 6 months. All we do is look at the data, right? We're looking at empirical data, we're looking at qualitative data, we're interviewing people, we're giving them surveys and so forth because of the issue that you mentioned. I don't think it, in many cases, changes our conclusions. Just about every campus across the US has problems with their student communication systems. Just about every campus has problems not coordinating the way they deliver academic advising and so forth. Why the data is so important, why collecting all that evidence is important, is what I need to do is go into the room and not say, you have a problem. It's that you're not coordinating your advising. I have to show them that via their own data. I have to show, here's the problem. Your retention rate just did this because you didn't do this particular thing that you need to do. Or your students are dropping out for financial reasons at much greater rates than your peers because you're not doing this thing in the financial space. So the data is what allows those conversations to be not about me telling somebody what to do, but about them discovering what they need to do via the evidence in front of them.
And I'm guessing those conversations have got easier over time. There was one line that I heard when I was researching the book from Hillary Pennington, who was with the Gates Foundation at the time, saying, student success was something that nobody was talking about, and now it's something that everybody is talking about, which, I think is in large part due to what happened on this campus under your leadership. And in the early days, there were people who would get up at meetings and saying, I don't believe these results. They were skeptical that what you were doing here was necessarily transferable to other places. All those things you were doing, and just, for the benefit of people who don't know, just very quickly, it was things like looking at where students could more easily get to the standard they needed to, whether it was flipping the model in mathematics so that they were doing coursework on a computer on their own time rather than being in a huge lecture hall with a lecturer. It was having the interactive, proactive advising and the data analytics to sort of steer people as quickly as possible into the right major. All these things that were very, very new and groundbreaking at the time. It was figuring out where people were running out of money and providing them with grant money without asking them to apply for it, just by following the data you already had. All these ideas that were remarkable when they were introduced and have now become more or less commonplace, in higher education institutions that are interested in this subject. I assume that, now that you have this track record, now that people have sort of taken on board what is possible, that conversation where you're saying, this is what ideally would need to change to make all these things work better, I assume that conversation's got easier for those reasons. But I also want to sort of supplement that by just asking, what are the things, as you have those conversations, that surprised you? Because I assume there's surprises in every institution that you talk to.
Yeah, so one of the most gratifying things about the work of the NISS over the first couple years of its existence is the point that Andrew is making now, that there are these things, the Panther retention grants, which often go nationally under the heading now of completion grants, but Georgia State was clearly the first to scale that program. The use of predictive analytics in advising so that you don't wait for students to come to you, but you proactively outreach to the students. The use of chatbots and AI in order to communicating. We were the very first school really to scale that back in 2016. These things that were questioned, many cases to my face, but certainly seen as fringe ideas, have now become the absolute central part of the student success portfolio, at least for public institutions. And so we have surveyed over the last 3 years about 2,500 student success practitioners as part of our data gathering efforts. And maybe the most surprising finding there is there's almost no pushback about whether their campus should be doing these things. What we hear again and again is, oh, we don't know how to implement predictive analytics or a microgrant program or use AI. But there's almost no debate anymore about whether that's the better way to do things. Of course, our advisors should be tracking students via the data, identifying problems before the students themselves are able to diagnose the issue and reaching out to the students proactively. Of course, we should be basing our institutional aid on data so that we target the students who can benefit from the aid the most, rather than just spreading the funds around kind of haphazardly and so forth. Yes, we need to be using AI to communicate with our students and provide 24/7 answers to their questions and so forth. There's no debate about that anymore. The debate is how we can do that. And that's really encouraging to me. It should be encouraging to all of us, because these are evidence practices that work, that show transformative change, that bring about much better results for students overall, that help close and even eliminate equity gaps, and they are being embraced by the whole field of student success at this point. That's a sea change from where we were 10 years ago, where all of the debate of student success, if they were even talking about it, was, well, yeah, we understand it's important, but there's really no standard for what we should be doing. There's no evidence-based approaches. There's no real affirmation of what works and what doesn't. Georgia State has been critical there, and one of the things that we've done better than just about any other school in the country is when we pilot something, we create a randomized control trial, we create a controlled study, we bring in an outside evaluator so the data will not be questioned. It won't be questioned by our internal stakeholders, but now that we're talking to presidents and cabinets from 100 other institutions, it won't be questioned by them either. So we have helped shape a really significant change in the national conversation about student success. And the idea that it's an institutional responsibility now to understand when a student is on path and off path, and to proactively reach out to the students to make sure that they stay on path, or if they've gotten off path, get them back on path as quickly as possible. That was largely unheard of 10, 12 years ago, and now it's almost not contested at all as exactly what we need to do if we're a responsible institution.
No, it's interesting. When I was talking to other institutions 5, 6 years ago when I was researching the book, there was a residual skepticism. People would say, oh, well, Georgia State is big. Georgia State is, favored by the Georgia university system. Georgia State doesn't have any unions, so that makes it much easier. All these objections and arguments. I was at a strategy meeting of the NISS this morning and saw some new data that shows that when institutions follow this kind of path and introduce these programs and carry them out effectively, which is also a huge part of it, you see the results. And I don't know if you want to talk through some of these new results.
Yeah, sure. These are just data we collected over the last couple of weeks. I'm going to do a keynote out at Arizona State later this week. So what we did is compile a list of large public institutions. Collectively, they enroll about 1 million students. And what I labeled them as early adopters of this data-based approach. These are some schools you're familiar with, but some that you may not be. But institutions that we at Georgia State work with over the past decade, they came to us in many instances saying, we like what you're doing with predictive analytics, we like your microgrant program, please show us how to do it. UCF, University of Central Florida, for instance, saw our Panther Retention Grant program over a decade ago, have introduced and scaled that program at University of Central Florida. They have almost as many recipients of those retention grants at UCF as we do at Georgia State. UT San Antonio, University of Texas San Antonio, loved what we were doing in predictive analytics. I visited their campuses twice over a decade ago or so. And it turns out that they basically introduced many of the same programs we have at Georgia State. So we compiled these institutions, 15 or so of these big public four-year institutions that have, as of a decade ago or so, begun to use the same model that we use at Georgia State. The average increase in retention rates across those institutions has been 18 percentage points, about 3 times higher than the national increase over the same period. And what we saw across those institutions is significant decrease in equity gaps as well. So the gap between graduation rates overall and graduation rates for Black students at these data-forward institutions is less than half what it is nationally. For Hispanic students, it's even less than that. So, these approaches work. It's one of the reasons why we've got campuses lining up to work with the NISS, because it is increasingly clear that when you do these things and do these things at scale, they're going to have a transformative impact for students.
So I want you to talk a little bit also about AI, because you mentioned it earlier about the chatbot that we have on this campus. And it's something that people are very concerned about nationally, especially in the context of higher education. The chatbot was first introduced for admissions and incoming students in 2016. Now it's been greatly expanded into other areas, or at least you're experimenting with expanding it into other areas. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's going on most recently and the results that have been achieved through it, but also where you see that technology going? And is AI a sort of a uniquely different technology, or is it just another platform that you can take advantage of to pursue? You can use it for good or for evil, as it were, and you can pursue it for good just as easily.
Yeah, I would never present myself as an expert in AI, but what I can observe is that there are really two debates going on, at least two debates going on nationally about AI. There's a whole set of concerns about how this will shape our future in all kinds of areas, including, classroom teaching and so forth. But when it comes to student success, the field that I know best and that I'm engaged in every day, there really is not a lot of debate. For decades, we've known that what we need to do to succeed at the university level with our students is deliver personalized attention to students at scale. That was never in debate. It's just that 15 years ago at Georgia State, we didn't have the resources to do that. We have relatively low tuition. We have a small endowment. We don't have a small class size compared to a lot of elite institutions. It was hard to deliver personalized attention to students at scale. What we've been able to do at Georgia State is level the playing field, at least to a degree. Predictive analytics help our advisors lower the playing field by giving the advisors information about, in your precious 8 hours you're working today, who can you reach out to and have the biggest impact on if you offer them some support. And I put AI under the same category. It's not really debatable to me whether this is a tool that can help us in student success, because what it allows us to do is deliver personalized attention to students at scale. The first 3 months we had AI available, and this was not 6 months ago or 2 years ago, we launched and scaled AI communication platforms at Georgia State in 2016. The first 3 months we had it available, we had over 180,000 exchanges with Georgia State students. And many more of the exchanges were at 12 midnight than they were at 9 in the morning. This is delivering personalized attention to our students at scale. We found from our first randomized control trials, the students who benefited the most from the communication platform empowered by AI were our working students, our first-gen students, our low-income students, because they're the students who weren't available at 3 o'clock in the afternoon to get their questions answered, but at 11 o'clock when they came home from their jobs or from putting the kids to bed, the platform was there. So we've had success from the beginning with AI. Many of you know that this past December, we received a large $7.6 million grant from the U.S. Department of Education. It's funding a 4-year project where we're expanding the use of our AI coach in introductory math and English classes. We're doing it at Georgia State at the Atlanta campus, at our perimeter campuses, and also partnering with University of Central Florida and Morgan State to see if we can improve outcomes in first year math and English classes through this tool. But I can see all kinds of good things coming from AI in helping us deliver personalized attention to students at scale. Whether that means that there aren't going to be problems in other applications of AI, I'm not able to really comment on, but I do know that it's already making a big benefit to our students here at Georgia State.
And it was tremendously useful during the pandemic as well, in terms of knowing what was going on.
The fact that we were already using video conferencing for our advisors, had a chatbot communicating with students 24/7, was a huge leg up during the pandemic. And I had a number of institutions coming to us during the pandemic and now to the NISS after the pandemic saying just that we weren't equipped to deal with all the challenges of the pandemic and the pivot to virtual, and we need to learn about how to use some of these platforms and systems.
And another thing you've said to me is that COVID was not only a crisis in itself, but it also revealed a crisis in higher education in terms of how institutions communicated with students and the impact of that. What has been your experience since the pandemic of how people understand the crisis they were facing and what they now feel they're doing about it, and how consistent is that? Obviously, you have client institutions who are very receptive.
Yeah, we're going to turn to the audience questions in just a moment. So let me just say that I think what's happened after the pandemic is a confluence of issues that have made student success efforts and the kind of model that Georgia State provided even more important. It is residual issues, learning loss, mental health issues, needing to be more proactive and holistically supportive of our students due to COVID. But there are also demographic shifts, as we know. The number of high school graduates across the country is going down. Some of the systems that are working with the NISS currently, the entire Kansas system, Maine, we've worked with systems in Michigan and so forth. These are states that are ground zero for demographic declines. And if you're enrolling 20% fewer students, the only viable way to continue to support the workforce and continue to support the bottom line financially for the institution is to figure out a way to graduate 20% more of the students who are already enrolled. So that issue has come to bear. And then, although it's differing by different parts of the nation, there is more attention on equity issues as well. Over the last few years. And the fact that these holistic supports not only help to raise graduation rates overall, but significantly reduce, if not eliminating, equity gaps is another part of what's bringing attention to some of the programs of the NISS.
Great. Well,
all right.
Let's pause it there.
Let's pause it there and give a big thank you to Andrew, Dr. Renick, and Serinna. Such an engaging conversation, but of course now we'd like to open the floor for questions from the audience. So we do have 2 microphones in the audience for if you have questions, but we also have some questions that were submitted in advance of the presentation, so we will start with those questions. So Dr. Renick, you spoke quite a bit about the success of the NISS and success that we've seen with NISS clients. One of the questions was around the fact that while we've seen a number of clients who've been able, and institutions across the country who've been able to replicate the success at Georgia State and seen similar gains, there are some who are unable to replicate those achievements. Can you talk about common reasons why this doesn't work out or the work doesn't seem to gain traction at some other institutions, and how might those reasons be mitigated?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's one that I get, especially up front, from some of our potential clients. I will say this to try to be fairly concise, that while it's not the case that every campus we've worked with has seen positive results, that of the first 60-something we work with and now have about a year's worth or more of data, there have been substantive improvements in about 80% of those campuses. And why doesn't it work everywhere? I don't think it's because using data in a proactive and holistic way isn't good for providing better supports for students. it's typically because there is some challenge at that institution in making the systematic changes that are required. We've worked with some campuses where there have been a lot of turnover at the top of the institution. We've had to draw back and pause for a moment before we re-engage, because if they've lost their president and the provost has stepped down and so forth, that's not the right moment to say, oh, now let's think about systematically changing the way you deliver advising across campus and so forth. There are instances where there are other pressures that come to bear with other priorities that come from the state and so forth. But you'd be hard to convince me that if what you're doing on a day-to-day basis is delivering more personalized attention to your students and being more proactive in doing so, that won't result in positive gains. And so what we've seen at the NISS is just that when that change is made, you do see positive gains in outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk some in the last chapter of the book about how Georgia State's success has an inward-facing aspect, so doing some of that internal problem solving, but then an external-facing aspect, which was kind of trumpeting the achievements and letting people know about the Georgia State story. How would you advise institutions to balance those two components when making change?
Yeah, well, that might be partly an Andrew question, too, about the two sides that you represent. I'll say that I think that there are two things that need to be done in student success. One is to make the changes that are going to be beneficial to students. Other is to change the campus conversation so that there is buy-in support for those changes. Those don't always go hand in hand. They should. But part of what we do at the NISS is equip leadership with the data and arguments they need to face even the most skeptical of faculty members or board members at their institution and be able to say, this is why we're doing it. Every engagement that we have, we close the presentation with a discussion of why this particular change matters from a moral perspective, a political perspective, and a financial perspective. And providing each campus with customized arguments about why these things are beneficial from each of those lenses.
Mm-hmm. All right, any questions from the audience? If not, we have one more question, and this one's for you, Andrew.
Okay.
And that is, are there any, after doing this work and interviewing countless students and administrators, were there any parts of the Georgia State story that you wish you could explore further?
That's an excellent question. There were parts of the Georgia State story that I explored that ended up not being in the book because they weren't necessarily about the story as I was telling it. I think there was more to explore in terms of telling the story of people who face extreme financial hardship. And there was a story that I wish I could have included in the book about a student who was here and her mother, who was also enrolled at Georgia State. And they had endured unbelievable poverty. Tiffany was the daughter, her childhood, they'd moved 20 times, they'd been homeless or borderline homeless more times they could count. It was a big issue in terms of keeping her enrolled in a good school rather than a bad school to try and push forward and improve themselves over time. And when I met them, the mother had tremendous health issues that she couldn't afford to address, but was still going to college, trying to improve herself. She told these extraordinary stories about how she would work one job in an office during the week, and then on the weekend she'd come back and clean the same office.
Wow.
And just understanding what that is like. One of the things that was very striking to me was right after I met them, I then was talking to somebody who was Tim's liaison to a lot of the foundation funds and other scholarships that are available, Holly Joseph. Mm-hmm. And I found myself just saying to Holly, I just met these two people who need a lot of things. What have you got? And I think that's a big part of the Georgia State story too, which is I became sort of enthused with this idea that there's no problem so big that there isn't a solution to be found. Mm-hmm. And I think institutionally that was a fascinating thing to track. I think universities, generally speaking, tend to believe that change is slow if it comes at all, that certain things are just the way they are and that's it, and a sort of certain fatalism sets in. What the story of Tiffany and her mother Phoebe told me, and sort of seeing how there was a community that could kind of rally around and say, okay, let's find solutions to these problems, was a real revelation. And I don't, if I could have talked about that more in the book, I would have done.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think one of the things that's inspiring to me about that story and all of this is we think a lot about this work in terms of numbers. You know, we talk about retention rates and graduation rates and percentages and points. And every one of those percentages and points is a person in a story and changing it, and not just even changing their lives, but changing their community and changing their family and changing lives for their children and the people around them. And that's why we do this work, and this work is so important. So thank you for that. And let's thank all of our speakers and panelists, President Blake, Dr. Calhoun-Brown, Sienna, Andrew Gumbel, Dr. Renick.
Let me say a particular thanks to Andrew, because Andrew's been with us on this journey for now 6 years or so from the start, made countless visits to Georgia State. And while it started as an assignment, I dare say that when you were first approached about writing this book, you didn't know a heck of a lot about Georgia State. You become a real friend and ally, and have taken this story to a national audience that we couldn't have dreamed about without your help and support. So thank you, Andrew, so much for all you've done. I'll also mention that Andrew gave all of his royalties from the book to Georgia State scholarships, which is exceptional.
Wow.
I'm going to say one more thing very quickly, which is which is apropos of how it got into my bloodstream, the excitement for what's going on here. It was the day I met Crystal Mitchell, who's sitting in the audience there, and another advisor, Carrie Claiborne, who no longer works here. And I'm sorry, you're here.
Carrie.
Oh, they're here.
And you both told me stories about your students that you'd advised, and somehow it just got me here. It's like, first of all, I have to meet these students, and I did. And secondly, there's something really extraordinary here that I had no idea until I started getting into it. So thank you to both of you and everybody who does this extraordinary work here.
So we're not done. We're going to have a book signing. Andrew is consented to sign some copies of his book. If you didn't bring your copy, we do have some copies around. So we're going to adjourn.
We are adjourning. Just a few housekeeping things, because we do also have a global audience. This is being live streamed, so if you'd like to connect with us, follow us on X, follow us on LinkedIn, go to our website. Also, you will receive an email link with a recording of this session, so if you missed it or you would like to share it, please do so. And that is kind of the conclusion. We thank you guys so much for joining us. You can follow us right across the hall for the book signing. And we are just so grateful to have you all with us. So have a wonderful evening, and please look out for future events.